Hello, everyone, and welcome to the CTF Weekly Recap Season Preview Show. This is not going to be a one-off episode. Uh, Sorry to disappoint all of you guys. We're just going to be doing the preseason show here for the time being, but we'll be back every week, hopefully, to give you updates on how the CTF League's been going and everything along those lines. For today, I'm joined here by my wonderful co-hosts. Guys, if you'd like to introduce yourselves.
Yo, this is Carson here.
Hey guys, I'm Bisky.
And Slapster, also known as Renee.
So we're all here to bring you some of the exciting hype, some of the exciting things to look forward to for the first season of the CTF League. We're all very excited about this project, and we've got some interesting teams lined up to make this league very competitive. So with that in mind, I think we're ready to get going here. And the first thing we want to talk about, the first thing we have to talk about, is the format for this CTF League. Now, the league is going to be taking place over the course of 9 weeks, and it's a pretty cool format, I think it's fair to say. Each team's going to be facing every other team in the group stage once, and additionally, they're going to have a bye week. Now, unfortunately, we did have to change the format around a bit towards the end of the league, and that was the result of the Burger Knights dropping out after a long stretch of inactivity. So it was initially going to be 10 teams with each team playing all but one team, but with things reformatted, I think it's actually a little bit simpler. And after that period of time where the teams are going to be facing off against each other in the group stage, the top 8 out of the 9 teams are going to advance to a double elimination playoffs. What that means is each team has plays in the upper bracket, and after they lose, they do get one more chance in a lower bracket to try and make it all the way to the grand finals of the tournament. So it's definitely a format that is popular in a lot of other leagues, but I don't think one that's been tried in CTF yet. So, guys, I'm curious to hear your thoughts. Do you like this format? Do you think there's anything that could be improved? Are you excited for the CTF League?
Yeah, I really am. I think you're right in the sense that the format and how it changed is a little bit more simplistic, and though that kind of means that the Burger Knights cannot play, and that's very unfortunate. I think this will make it a lot easier and much more interesting. But I'm really excited to get this thing kicked off.
Yeah, I mean personally, I'm a huge fan of the double elimination format specifically being added. It's something I've been wanting to see in CTF tournaments and whatnot for a long while. So with that being added, it should be a pretty fun one.
I think you guys said it best. I'm a big fan of the double elimination tournament as well. And just overall being a bit more of a sophisticated style of competition, which is really exciting for everyone.
Yeah, definitely. So, next thing we're moving on to here, if I understand correctly, are the map pools for each week. Now, one thing about this league format is that every week is going to have a different pool of pre-picked maps. There's no team picking involved. And while the maps are picked from a larger pool of maps, it's going to be a different set of 3 each week. So this particular week, if I have things down correctly here, we're going to be having the teams play Rundown as their first map, Pagodas 3 as their second map, and finishing up on Waitomo Caves. Definitely a map pool that is a bit different from what we've had in previous tournaments. Rundown, I believe, will be making its appearance in official tournament play for the first time ever. So definitely very interesting set this week. Obviously, Pagodas 3 has been played a lot, but the other two are a little less common. So I'm curious how you guys think those maps will play out.
It's definitely interesting to see Rundown here. I know it's been very, very recently introduced in kind of competitive play. Um, and I'm really not sure how it's going to favor teams individually on an individual basis. Rundown is definitely the big question mark as far as my opinions and such, but I'll just have to see how it plays out in these first few rounds here.
Yeah, and to discuss the other two maps as well, I mean, Pagodas 3 and Waitomo Caves are maps we've seen played in competitive quite a lot recently, and teams do have their own opinions of them. Pagodas is a map that a lot of teams have been playing, and I think Waitomo could actually be a pretty big swing map for this week as the third map.
Yeah, I think what I especially like about this map choice is that it's definitely different from what we've seen from the tournament. Usually, it'd start out with a map, and then the losing team picks the next map based on their individual and advantages. But here we're kind of seeing a luck of the draw. So some teams might be very confident on one map, but that could be easily switched up with round two. So it's kind of anybody's game.
Yeah, and one good thing about the length of this group stage as well is that since you're playing so many games, getting an unlucky set of maps in 1 week is not going to affect your overall record too much. It might mess with you in a key game, but as long as you're winning games consistently, you're going to be one of the top 8 out of 9 teams and going to be able to move on to the next stage of the tournament. So I don't think the RNG will impact things too much, and it'll be very cool to see teams prep for specific maps each week. Now, moving on here then, we do have our weekly schedule for this first week of the tournament. We've got some very interesting matches that we're going to preview a little further later on, but I do want to point them out here because they are going to be setting the tone for the rest of the tournament. Now, you guys, I believe, can see the matches on screen, but to list them off very quickly here, the Baguettes are going to be playing Olympus. Those are the first 2 seeds of the tournament. Our 3rd seed and 4th seed, Delta Force and Citrix, will be playing as well. The 5th seed and 6th seed, Annihilation and the Crusaders, will be matching up. And we have a real banger in our 7th and 8th seed game between Fotiá and the Roxerces, 2 teams that have been playing a lot this last week, and we're, I think, all very excited to see them face off against each other. So hopefully, with that in mind, we'll see some exciting matches this week. Any ones that stand out as matches to watch just right off the bat? Carson?
Personally, I think the big one for me is going to be the 1-2 match with the Baguettes versus Olympus. I think recently they have come really close in skill level, and especially with this map pool that a lot of people might say favors Olympus, Waitomo Cave specifically being a Olympus signature map, that definitely like shrinks the gap between those 2 teams that people honestly may not expect, the results to be the same as always in their match this week.
All
Yeah, I
righty.
mean,
Well,
oh.
go ahead, Mike, by all
Yeah,
means.
TB Olympus is definitely an interesting match, but I also think this 7 and 8 match between Roxerces and Fotiá will be pretty interesting. Again, you mentioned these teams have both been very active, and they have 2 very different styles that I think I'll highlight a little bit later when we do start discussing predictions. But I think it'll be as close of, if not a closer match than the TB and Olympus one.
All right, and Renee, any that stand out for you?
Um, I agree on both ends, to be honest. I think I'm also in a biased way because I was formerly on Olympus. I'm very, very looking forward to TB versus Oli. Not only that, but because if we remember correctly from the tournament, in the semifinals, Olympus actually lost to Ad Fundum on that final map of Waitomo Cave. So I kind of want to see them have a little bit of fire in their stomachs for that last match with TB, and maybe that'll kind of push them and drive them to really topple it.
Yeah, definitely a lot for Olympus to play for, especially on that particular map. They did play it against TB in their previous match as well and pull out a 1-0 win, but Waitomo Caves as the final map probably has a little bit of a different meaning to it for Olympus, given that tournament semifinals game. That very exciting game, I think it's fair to say. Now, with that all taken care of, we're going to move on to talk about the different teams in the tournament and preview how their seasons might go. And we do have a lot of very interesting and competitive teams playing in this tournament, playing in this league. So we're going to go from low seed to high seed, and that may not reflect where we put the exact power levels of each team, so to speak, but definitely that'll be our guide going forward. And with that in mind, we're going to start with the one team that has their bye in the first week, and one of the newer teams, I think, here in this CTF league, Team Fallen. Miski, what can we expect from them? We haven't seen them play an official match yet, so what should we be looking for?
Yeah, this roster is pretty interesting. A lot of these players are new to the scene, but they do have some players that have been around for a while. people like Visk or Forleb, who is actually their leader in rep, I believe. I expect this team to come into this tournament, maybe pull off a couple unexpected game wins. I think they do have a couple good players on specific roles that are going to do really good for them. Again, we do have Forlib on Pyro and whatnot. It's a very big and important role in the team scene. They could pull off some upset wins over some of these other teams we have ranked a little bit low.
All right. Carson, with that prediction from Mike in mind, do you see
Yeah.
this team upsetting anyone? Do you think there are any teams that might be particularly vulnerable to Team Fallen?
If I had to, predict one of the games that they would upset against, I think that perhaps Fotiá or Fotiá may be a candidate and a kind of a target for Team Fallen. I think that would be an appropriate goal just to, scrape out a win and hopefully upset the popular opinions that people may have.
Yeah, definitely. Now, that roster does have a number of new pickups. Forleb, from what I understand, might have a little bit of a personal situation that'll prevent him potentially from playing in this first week, but he'll definitely be around. He'll definitely be leading that team at the very least. They do have some interesting new pickups, including Kate is Awesome 4. They picked up Nurth, or formerly North United, and they do have some players who I think Mike and I at least have talked about as very interesting players to see them develop, XXXX being a prime example of that. So they've definitely made some interesting pickups recently, most recent, in fact, being Crashable. Is there anyone on that roster outside of Forlib who really stands out as a player that we might see develop and become a bit stronger during the tournament?
I think Cade is actually a pretty good candidate for that. He's very, very confident on offense, and I think that's exactly what this team needs is someone who can really kind of lead that offensive front. And so far, in my experience with seeing him in PPMs and in casual, he does kind of take authority with that, and he is becoming more and more confident by the day. So I hope being on this team kind of fosters that within him a little bit more, and we can see more from him as it goes on.
Yeah, I do see this offense as kind of the X factor for this team. Players can develop quite a bit. Uh, Again, XXXX is a player we've been highlighting a little bit. They also have Cade, which Sloppy mentioned, and Glaze, who I believe was formerly on TC and was playing Soldier and Chemist for them. So this offense definitely has an opportunity to really improve throughout this journey. And again, if they are going to get that upset victory, I think it's going to be through their offense.
All right. Um, One other player worth discussing, just in terms of the innovation that they've been undertaking in terms of the way their role is being played, I think is Alvarid. I've heard some people discuss the Trenny spot being replaced by the Alvarid spot in PPMs. So, anyone want to give a little insight as to what that is, what that looks like, and how that might impact Team Fallen's chances of winning?
I think
Well,
that, yeah. Sorry.
you go.
Yeah, yeah. There's a lot of variation, especially on maps that people almost always expect the archer to play in, and you almost base your offense off of that and how you play. But that kind of one-off positioning that catches you off guard is definitely something that Team Fallen can use to their advantage in situations like um, especially on maps where archers are almost always in the same spot and there's very standard positioning for them. Things like that could definitely boost the position or the performance of Team Fallen.
All right. So I think we've discussed a lot of different topics with Team Fallen here. Obviously, they do have a lot to prove. They're a very inexperienced team. But when it comes down to it, despite all the potential they have, despite the potential maybe for a few upset wins, what do you guys think? Is the ninth seed in this tournament warranted? Does Team Fallen belong at the bottom of the barrel right now? And are we going to have to wait to see them improve and potentially move out of that spot? Or are they going to be coming fast out of the gates and winning matches right off the bat?
Really depends because I haven't seen them utilize too many practice times personally. I think the one thing that they have going with them is a very early set forth synergy. A lot of them know each other really, really well, have been in lots of Discord channels together. So they're pretty fond of each other, at least in that sense. But I am curious to see how that kind of manifests itself in a gameplay. So I do think it's a little early to tell, but that's just my opinion.
Yeah, I mean, I think this team does have an opportunity to kind of come out fairly strong. They don't play week 1, they play week 2 versus Annie, which could be a pretty tough match for them. But they do actually play Fotiá in round 3, which is going to be in the first third of the tournament. And that's one of the games we discussed them potentially taking. So if they're going to do it, that would be the match to look for them to really come out, take a win, and, set a good pace for the rest of the tournament.
All right. Well, with that in mind, I guess we're going to be moving on to our next seed, a team that's been playing a little bit more recently and actually had a big win in what I believe was their first official quite recently. Now, the pronunciation of this team is a bit of a sore spot for certain players in the community, so I'm going to try my best here. Our 8th seed, and a team that I think we're all very excited to talk about their prospects, is going to be Fotiá.
Oh yeah, I may have butchered that previously here in the stream as well. But Fotiá definitely has a lot of pickups and a lot of uh, a mix of sort of newer players and experienced players, which is really interesting um, from my perspective. Normally, teams will have um, a pretty homogenous kind of build up, but this one definitely is a really interesting mix. You have players like Pepe on Archer, who and Pi, who have been here forever and have a lot of experience and can bring a lot of interesting leadership skills to the table. And then you have newer players and newer pickups like Jaden Mattal, Shia, who's players like that who can definitely show their potential during this tournament.
All right, and speaking of those players, Pi, we know, is the representative of that team. And there are a bunch of other players on that roster, notably Tom D53, who share that same origin story of being on Ad Fundum for the tournament finals. In the case of Tom joining right before the tournament finals and trying to play on that offense, unfortunately getting matched up against the Baguettes in what was probably one of the more one-sided official matches we've ever had. But then afterwards, rising out of the ashes of Ad Fundum and forming Fotiá, forming a team meant to compete on this league stage. So, with that all in mind, Miski, do you think they're looking for redemption here? Is there any particular storyline that Fotiá will be trying to demonstrate during the tournament, or is this just a team that's here to have fun and have a good time?
I think for this tournament specifically, Fotiá is actually one of my dark horse teams, a team that could really, again, come out of the gates very strong and surprise a lot of people. I think you already mentioned a lot of their offense being formerly from AF. Again, you have Pi, you have Tom, but then you also have players like Hundredth, who I think is similar to XXXX, who we talked about on Team Fallen, is a player that's developing very quickly and pretty strong. And I think their offense could really surprise a lot of people. Some of these middle of the table teams um, kind of have a more, I guess, balanced roster, a decent offense, a decent defense. Fotiá, for me, is a team who has a very strong offense. And I think if they do start these games out quickly, they could maybe, take a quick 3-0 win on map 1, tilt some of those teams, and then use that momentum to go forward and win more matches, etc.
All right, Renee, I saw you nodding there during that segment, and I know you played against Fotiá last week as part of the Crusaders roster, and you were nodding specifically when Mike said they had a very good offense. So I'm curious, from a firsthand experience, what was it like playing against that team, and do you feel that their offense really is as good as it maybe is being hyped up to be?
I think it's definitely formidable and was a really, really pleasant surprise when I played them. I think that, that their offense essentially is comprised of Pi, Tom, and either Cypridiot on medic offense or Cherry on medic offense. And I think that it is in itself a very, very intimidating front. And a lot of people might not see that initially, but when you play them first and foremost, you can see that and you feel a little bit of terror facing them. So I really want to say that they are underestimated, actually. and they should be, up to par with a lot of the other offense that the other teams in the season have to boast. So I definitely don't want the other teams to underestimate them because they are very, very fluent with their motions. They know what they're doing. They have mechanisms in order to execute certain strategies, and they have a really good repertoire for that already.
All right. Definitely a very strong endorsement there, I think it's fair to say, of Fotiá and their offense. With that said, their defense, I've heard, is a little bit more of a question mark. And that's interesting to me because they do have some very experienced players on key roles for that defense. They've obviously picked up the brother of our beloved food court, underscore Pepe on Archer. He's a very experienced player in that role. They've picked up Rob Ferretti, also known as Orange Duck, a very experienced pyro, the longtime pyro main of Annihilation, even if he wasn't necessarily playing all the time. And they do have some other players who've been around for the draft tournament, such as they've picked up Jaden Matal, they've picked up Islandinger, who Miski would be a little bit more familiar with. So I'm curious, Mike, what do you think about that defense? Do you think they have the pieces there to be solid? Do you think it is a relative weakness or maybe even a relative strength compared to the offense?
I think it's somewhere in the middle. And what I mean by that is I think this is a defense that other teams are going to look at and underestimate them. And because of that, they're going to be able to come out and maybe surprise them. Players like Islandinger that you mentioned. Islandinger is a very underrated assassin player in my opinion. Even Jimmy on Pyro or Rob Ferretti. He's a player who didn't play for a while, but he's getting back into the game now, and he has been playing extremely actively. Like these are players, especially on Fotiá, who are very, very active on casual CTF and are playing like a large percentage of some of these days. And I think that activity is going to help them, especially on their defense, kind of level up throughout the tournament and again maybe upset people, surprise them, whatnot.
All right. So before we move on, I do want to ask a question to everyone here and get your opinions on this. And it's a pretty simple one, I think. Where do you see Fotiá at the end of the tournament? Have they moved past that 8th position that they're starting at? Are they going to be, one of the teams competing for maybe a middle of the pack spot, maybe even a top 4 or 5 spot? Are they going to be a little bit lower down the rung? Are they going to fall down? Is Team Fallen going to move past them in the rankings? What do you guys think?
Man, it's hard to predict. This group stage is going to be a couple months long here, so it's hard to predict that far in advance. I do think that with the current activity we've been seeing, like Miski mentioned, just having your players play a lot and be willing to improve and be, um, you know, really passionate about playing with the team and things like that. That could definitely be something that can boost them up the rankings to 7, 6, 5. Those are definitely not out of the realm of possibility for Fotiá.
Yeah, I agree. I think if we're listing numbers and kind of gauging by those numbers, I would say 5, 6, or 7 would kind of be the sweet spot for Fotia right now because again, they are very active. In fact, they're in a PPM right now. So I think that says a lot about their devotion and that they're really, really, really trying to work their way towards the top. So I don't think that having them placed in the 8th seed is a great representation of their potential, but we will see how that pans out in the future.
Yeah, I agree with Sloppy here. I do think 5 through 7 is kind of the sweet spot for Focia here. Personally, I'm expecting more of a 6 or 7 looking at their team now, but if they do grow throughout the tournament, I could honestly see them upsetting maybe one of the top 5 teams. And with the way this is set up, one big upset like that towards the end of the tournament could slot them into 5 or 6.
All right, definitely very bullish on the chances of Fotia here, but we're going to be moving on to their direct competition this week. It's a team that's been around for more than a year now, which actually surprised me when I was looking through the teams in preparation for this broadcast. It's a team that has a very active and very communicative leader, another player who, much like the role that Tom D53 plays on Fotia, you know, is very active in their comms and tries to take a very active leadership role, that being Bar 1234. But they've also made some very interesting pickups to shake up the core of their roster within the last few weeks. They brought in a lot of players from other teams. And even players who were retired for a while. So, the Roxerces, what do you guys think? Who's going to be their X factor this tournament?
I think this is definitely a team that has one of the some of the most potential out of the teams I see in this group stage. Um, on the offense side, I have a lot of money riding on 93 and Fella and players like Glash as well. Um, 93 being a really consistent player that we saw put in a lot of work for the Midnight Snacks during the draft tournament, and he performed really well there. And if he continues to keep that kind of performance up, I'm really excited to see what he could do specifically in this upcoming group stage.
Yeah, I think I would also have to agree with that, at least on the offensive front. I think defensively speaking, the key players that we should probably look out for is, Shoki on like kind of a bulk defensive position because again, his PvP skills are pretty unhinged to be honest. They're quite frightening, especially coming from an offensive kind of point of view. And we can also kind of maybe put some bets on Kat Shanti as well, because again, we have seen her in many officials and unofficials being a pretty potent assassin player and getting a lot of recoveries that are really in clutch. Although we haven't seen her play that much after the fact of the assassin tweak. So I am curious to see how that will impact her gameplay a little bit more.
Yeah, I agree. I think those are all very impactful players, but I think one thing this roster has as well is a couple of underrated players or players people might not know a lot about. One of those is Mackie, who plays medic offense for them. Mackie was a player that I had my eyes on specifically during the draft tournament as a potential steal for later rounds. I think Mackie is a very good medic offense player and definitely underrated. They also just picked up Zodra or Slayway, who has formerly been on, I believe, Annie, TT, Defiance, a whole bunch of teams. A very solid archer player, known again for a pretty specific playstyle that's different from a lot of archers we see today. So he could be a player that other teams might not really know, and he could come out and put on a show for us.
Yeah, now I do have a question here for Carson because he's from a team, he's not on the Baguettes anymore, but previously was playing with them while they were running engineer on offense and engineer in a variety of roles, engineer on recovery, so on and so forth. The Roxerces do have a very particular specialist on their roster who's also on their council, Cake in a Suit. Now, we've seen some discussion about potential engineer buffs coming up in the future, at least some quality of life changes, right? But even assuming those don't take place, do you think there's going to be a role for him on Roxerces within this meta? Do you think there's a chance that we'll see some engineer coming out from their defense or perhaps even their offense?
I think that's it's definitely not impossible for us to see some engineer from Cake in a Suit. He's generally a pretty innovative player when it comes to how he chooses to play, choosing to go for a little bit more of a support role, like you mentioned with offense and necro and engineer and things like that. Um, I think that with this map pool as well, a lot of these maps not being as open, engineer could definitely help secure some areas on defense if he really wanted to run that. So I think it just depends on map pool and teams they're facing, how they're feeling with engineer in general.
All right, now one other game that Roxerces did play pretty recently was an unofficial against the Crusaders. And TC did use a lot of mercs in that matchup, I think a higher proportion than the Roxerces did. But TC also did come out on top, if my memory serves. So, with that in mind, Renee, in an official setting, do you think that matchup would play out differently? Do you think there are any players on Roxerces who might stand out in that setting a little bit more?
It is hard for me to say because you're right, that wasn't unofficial. And it was actually at that time, I believe I'm not sure if I was a Merc by then, but it might have been at that point in time. But saying that an unofficial kind of gives a clear indication of how things will go isn't the most accurate statement in the world, I believe, because there are a lot of Mercs who can kind of make up for gaps that you might see normally in a team. But in terms of that unofficial, it looked like the people who stood out Fella, of course, who's a I shouldn't even say pretty, a very, very persistent offensive soldier player who just kind of it's a very big rarity. He just kind of blocks out everything that's going around him and just keeps on going. So he is definitely a really, really good threat against any defender. And I think we already mentioned this, but 93 as well is also needs to be monitored a lot and could potentially be a death sentence for the other team if he is not kept a close eye on and mediated properly.
All right. So I think we're going to wrap on the same question here. That's going to be, where do you see Roxerces going down the line? Do you think this roster is going to gel quickly and gel well? Do you think they're going to see significant improvement over the tournament? Or are we maybe going to see a strong start and a little bit of a regression? What do you guys expect?
I think this is another 6-7 team with a potential for 5 if they get a big upset. I rank them pretty close to Fotiá, who we just discussed, and I think it's a similar kind of thing. Again, these are a good amount of older, more experienced players and a good amount of newer players, and it's really going to depend on how they kind of level up throughout the tournament.
Yeah, I tend to agree with a lot of what Miski said there. This week 1 match between the two teams um, might be a sign of how they could perform later on in the group stage as well. That's really a big question between 6, 7, maybe up to the 5 seed is where these teams will eventually land when it comes to the tournament stage of the season.
Yeah, I agree completely with both of those statements. I have nothing to add. I think that 5 to 7 range is a pretty good indicator of where they might be at. But then again, we've seen surprises before.
All right. Yeah, definitely another team to look out for throughout the course of the tournament. I'm very interested to see how they do. Speaking of interesting teams, we do have a roster here that was a tournament semifinalist last time around that came second in their group and actually won a very exciting game over Delta Force early on in the tournament that I think set the tone for a lot of how their group went. That's going to be the Crusaders, but I think it's worth noting that these are not the same Crusaders that we saw in the 2020 tournament. They've lost a significant number of players on their offense. Serlio left for Olympus. Pavlik and Kalig are no longer on the roster either. So it's a team that's changed quite a bit. I think also worth noting that Pudgy is no longer on that roster, which is pretty important. So with that in mind, the new TC roster has seen a few struggles recently. They did, as we mentioned before, lose an official quite recently to Fotiá, but this is still a roster that has a lot of very real threats on it. So, Renee, with the way that TC is looking right now, who do you see some standout players on your roster being?
Um, I think as far as, an offensive point of view goes, I think we're really focusing in on Swit, who's done a lot of good, especially in the previous match that we had against Fotiá. I think Ash is also a really, really key player when she does, play, because oftentimes our schedules do interfere and it is very, very hard to schedule accordingly. 915 is a big threat as well, especially as Scout and Elf. It's pretty unmatched. But yeah, I think that those are some really, really key players. I obviously can't speak too much because I would be biased, of course, but
Of course.
that's as far as I think those are some really, really good players that we have, and we're very, very lucky to have them.
All right, now we've also seen a bit of a different look from TC's offense recently in terms of the players that they've been running. Obviously, Leo no longer being on the roster makes a big difference, and we've seen a lot more play from a few people. Swit obviously being the lead capper right now, but also a lot of play from Diamond Girl 25, who's one of the newer members on that roster, with her playing in that medic role now. Mike, I'm curious what you think that offense shakeup means for TC and how those new players stand out.
Yeah, I think Diamond Girl 25 specifically is a very interesting player. She kind of has this lore around her on casual where she's that medic on casual that is just always where she needs to be when you get out, no matter what time in the map it is. And I think we've seen that on a couple of these TC matches. She does get some pretty clutch heals out. And again, they do have a lot more threat specifically on the Elf class now, I think, than they did in their previous iteration of the roster. We have Italian Penguin and 915 both actively playing, and I think Elf is a class that's really like rose in popularity recently, and people are really starting to see how strong it actually is. So TC having two of those Elf players, a solid medic pickup, and Swit coming back and getting active again on Soldier could bode pretty well for their offense.
Yeah, definitely. And Italian Penguin as well is definitely a player who I think I saw some pretty good performances from actually in the draft tournament as a member of the same team. Might be a little biased there, but I think he actually did a pretty good job. Now, Carson, you might also be familiar from PPMs with some of the more active players on TC's roster. Notably, a lot of people, when talking about TC, would point to Kev Shadowslayer or Razaragon and G. Henry as standouts on that roster's defense. So, do you see them being able to keep up with the rest of the teams in this tournament? Do you think they're going to be that much of an X factor?
I think that it's definitely something that keeps them as a formidable threat on the defensive side. Kev, Shadowslayer, and G. Henry, as well as other experienced defenders like Lawton and players like that. They definitely have a lot of carry potential. Most people would say, especially in the form of G. Henry, being arguably the top pyro in the game currently, and Kev just being so strong on maps like Blackout, which we may not see in the group stage here, but the amount of just individual performance that we see from special players on defense for TC is definitely something that a lot of teams have to look out for.
All right. So, one last question here for you, Renee. We didn't see too many additions from TC going into this tournament, but they did make one pickup at the last minute, which was to add 666 Sam to the roster. They're a player who's actually been pretty active in PPMs recently and definitely been grinding the game a fair amount. So, I'm curious what you, maybe as TC's representative on this desk, see them adding to the team and why they were picked up.
I think we most importantly picked her up because she is again a very, very active player. She showed a lot of devotion in terms of, attending PPMs and even hosting PPMs herself. So she really, really does have a passion for the game. So I think first and foremost, that's perhaps one of the most important things when selecting new players to join a roster. But in addition, I think she is she can play a little bit of a flex. I've seen her play Pyro on a couple of occasions. I've seen her play Medic. She does seem to be a little bit more comfortable on a defensive kind of state of mind, which is kind of what we need. I think a lot of people, the meme is that, TC has a lot of offense and, soldier mayhem. So it's really, really nice to kind of add a more defensive component to the team as well, rather than just us being overloaded with offensive, forefronts.
Right. And I think we're all definitely excited to see how that addition plays out. I think we're going to end, as we have previously, on the same question. Where do you guys see TC at the end of this group stage? Where do you think they're going to be placing relative to the other teams?
Personally, I would not be surprised if their ranking stayed the exact same as it did. I know a lot of teams have some potential to move around in the rankings, but with TC being such a consistent and old roster that we have seen time and time again, um, I think that they could very well move up definitely, but I personally see the 6th seed being the ending position for them.
TC is a team where personally I think I have them maybe falling a little bit in the rankings, and it's not due to anything specifically with them, except for some of the like player losses they have had, players like Leo, Kalig, Pab, Pudgy. But I also think it's due to a lot of these players that they're bringing back are players who have played for a while and maybe a little rusty, so it could be a bit hard for them in the beginning of the tournament. And I could see teams like Roxer Fotiá moving up past them. So my initial prediction for like TC would be maybe 7th or 8th.
Yeah, same thing. Again, I can't speak too much, and too forwardly without sounding like I'm favoring a single team just because I'm on that roster. But I would say, yeah, I think that any of those rankings could be a possibility, and again, we'll never know until we actually see what happens. But I think that's a good guess for the time being.
All right. Now, TC's been around for a while now, but the longest running team we have in this tournament is up next in our 5th seed. Founded all the way back in the fall of 2012, we have Delta Force, one of the. We're on Annihilation? Oh my goodness. Okay. Well, there goes all that prep, huh? Okay, Annihilation is up next. A very forgettable team. You can tell because I'm on it. And obviously, we've got some very forgettable Annihilation members on this desk. So, Miski, why is Annihilation such a forgettable team? Why would you expect them to do absolutely nothing this tournament?
I'm gonna have to disagree. I think with us being that forgettable. I mean, I guess as the leader of Annihilation, the one thing I can speak on here is kind of what our goal was coming into this tournament, because we had a pretty lackluster showing in the previous tournament, actually going 0-3 in the group stage, and we kind of wanted to come into this tournament focusing a lot on two things that we had an issue with, which was one, offensive depth, and two, a really strong second ninja player. And I think we actually accomplished both of those heading into this tournament. On offense, we picked up a couple people that are here with us today, Nin, Carson, and Cardona, as well as Mr. Ant. And then we managed to get Kavivi to become active again and play that second ninja role. So, yeah, I think maybe we were forgettable last tournament, but I think we're going to make some noise this time around.
All right, now Annihilation, all kidding aside, has definitely made some big moves recently and picked up a lot of players. I think really just a lot of players. Some of the more recent additions on that roster include one of our members here on the desk, Carson, but there are some other pickups they've made recently as well. Insanity, our lovely streamer, has joined the team. Kavivi also joined the roster to add some depth on defense, and the roster did also finally end a long-running trial and decide to move Mr. Ant 87 to the full roster as well. So out of those players, I know there might be a little bit of bias here, Carson, but who do you think really stands out among Annihilation's new pickups?
I genuinely feel that the medic off potential we have in Insanity, who has played medic off for years, can definitely be the biggest bolster to our offense. Second to that of that elf player that they may have picked up or something like that. But yeah, that the depth that we added to both sides of offense and defense, I think um, having that more well-rounded look as a team in general can definitely project us and propel us to the higher rankings near the end of this group stage.
Now, there has been some talk of teams maybe being overseeded or underseeded a little bit here in this tournament. Definitely seen a fair amount of it in the community Discord, at least. So, with that in mind, do you guys feel that Annihilation's rank is where it should be? Do you feel it's a little lower than it should be, maybe? Do you feel it's a little higher than it should be?
That's something that people personally we may be again a little bit more of a biased opinion here, but it could be lower. I think Renee might have a better idea of this without sounding a little bit sided towards Annihilation here.
I think a lot of the pickups that you guys have recently kind of registered have been a really, really good choice. Again, of course, you have Nin back, who, welcome back, Nin. So I think you guys also have a really, really good synergy with your team. So I think that Annie has a really, really good potential to actually go up from number 5. So I think that, again, time will tell, but it seems that you guys are, in fact, going to make a lot of more noise than being, quote unquote, forgettable, like how you thought you were in the last tournament. But I am really, really excited to see what you guys will pull off.
Yeah, I mean, I'm obviously going to be biased for this question, but I think I can confidently say off of scrims we recently having scrimbucks, the most important thing, that we are slightly underrated. Especially seed wise. I do think 5th is a little low for us, but it's on us to come out and kind of prove that in this tournament.
All right, now scrimbucks are notoriously a volatile currency. Houston in the Overwatch League playoffs apparently spent all of them and still didn't manage to pick up a win against the Uprising. So very, volatile currency to say the least. We don't know exactly how that's going to play out, and I think it's fair to say that Annihilation has had a bit of a rough time this year, certainly in the tournament, and they do need to put on a bit of a show, perhaps to make everyone forget about that. With that all in mind, Annihilation does have a pretty wide roster and some pretty colorful characters, so I'm curious for our other Annihilation members here on the desk, who do you think is the biggest meme on the roster?
I don't know if it's one specific player. We do have a lot of members from Horse Squad, which a lot of you might know. Chactation, Krabs, who's now seasonal, and Willer, I lost the game, and Trevor. They're just a really funny group. Hop on casual sometimes, break CTF. But behind the scenes, they're also very helpful when it comes to actually working on a lot of strategies and stuff for the team. So I think they're really helpful, but they are probably our biggest meme as a team. That little group there.
Yeah, as a newer member, I can't say I can speak on behalf of everyone else on the team here, but um, there's some meme potential, but then when it gets down to business, we could put the jokes aside and cap some flags.
All right. Well, wrapping up on that note, Annihilation definitely a team to watch for in this tournament. Apparently, our Annihilation representatives here on the desk are expecting big things from them. Can't say exactly why. With that in mind, I believe we're moving on to our fourth seed now in the tournament, and it's a team that's been a consistent performer, I think, for a while now. They didn't make it out of the group stage in the tournament, but they played a very tough group, and their results recently have been fairly strong. Certainly a roster with a lot of players to look out for. It's Citrix. Now, Citrix has made some interesting pickups recently for their roster. Notably, Valicon on Archer filling a hole that the team had as well. But do you think there's anyone else on that roster that really stands out among their more recent acquisitions within the last couple of months?
I guess I'll go first here. They did actually pick up a little bit of offensive depth as well. Again, they've recently picked up, I believe, Ubao, Mr. Bubdub, Quarterpan, and Rave. So that's a lot of depth specifically at classes like Elf, which we've talked about, in Ubao and Bub. And then Quarterpan and Rave both play Necro at a fairly high level. So we could see a little bit of a different look to their offense. They've already been known for running a lot of Elf, but Bubdub is also a player who can play Soldier pretty well, which is something I think this offense has been missing for a while.
All
I
right.
agree with that completely. So I have nothing to add there.
Carson,
Yeah,
any thoughts?
as in the team tourney we saw earlier this year, I got the chance to play a lot with Mr. Bubdub, who on the Baguettes was one of the biggest capping threats that we had, and I think he's got a lot to bring to the table for Citrix here, especially because of just the overall depth that he can bring to an offense and communications and game sense. He just always seems to be making the right plays at the right time in the important matches.
All right, so definitely a lot of faith put into Mr. Bubdub to work things out for the offense. Do you think there are any other offense standouts on that roster? Anyone you would particularly look for to help him out, Carson?
Yeah, well, you've got the some might say like the CX staples in the form of the Fatal Best and Flays and Color as well, who have all been well versed in offense and work really very, very well together. Um, CX definitely is known for being one of the more close-knit groups, and that can definitely boost them in their offensive endeavors, I guess you could say. Just being so close to each other and having really good chemistry.
All right, Mike, we've definitely seen a fair amount of Citrix recently. They've played some officials, notably against Olympus, which unfortunately didn't work out for them. But do you think there's anyone on that defense that really stands out as a leader or maybe a player who you might expect to carry a game for them if it comes down to it?
Oh yeah, I mean absolutely. Like again, they did pick up Valicon recently, but I think the real defensive carry here for Citrix is Wolfie. He's been one of the top ninjas in the game for almost the entirety of the time the game has existed. Formerly on ADV, very strong player there, and he's constantly been putting up really, really high damage numbers compared to a lot of other ninjas. And again, this is a team where I feel like their defense really feeds off of each other. They have players like College Degree, Avedis, etc., who paired with Wolfie are some of the strongest ninja duos in the game. And Wolfie is a leader. I'm not sure how long Wolfie's been talking in Citrix calls specifically, but he's also started talking in PPMs and whatnot recently. So that's going to add like another level of depth, kind of that leadership he can provide. And his calls are really good. And again, he's a great player. So I do expect him to kind of pop off and maybe carry this defense a little bit.
All right. Now, Renee, Citrix, I think, is at a seed where you can realistically see them challenging for the top spot in this league. They definitely got a roster with a lot of strong players on it. Do you think that's within reach for them right now, or do you think they have to work a little bit more to get within range of some of the top teams like Olympus and the Baguettes?
Um, I do think they're really close to kind of achieving that goal for themselves. The one thing I do have to say about Citrix is especially when it comes to like their council team, so like, Flaze, Fatal, Wolfie, and Color, that top four, I have never seen them have what you might call a bad day when they're playing. They're always consistent. They're always huge triple threats when it comes to, offense, defense, or even recovering. And so it's really, really nice to kind of see that they don't really have a lot of variation in their gameplay. They're very, very consistent with what they do, and so I think that that's going to be a really, really good thing for their team to come out on top potentially.
All right. Now, Carson, I'm going to put you on the spot here a little bit since you're our resident elf offense player. Uh, Color has been playing a fair amount of elf on and off, not always the most serious player, but there's been a bit of back and forth between Carson and certain players. So I'm very curious to hear what you think. Between Color and certain players. So I'm very curious to hear what you think. Who's the better elf out of Alaska and Color?
Whoa, that's a very heated argument. I don't want to get too controversial here, but I, you know, sometimes the ping that Color has may be an advantage for him on Elf, and other times the lower ping that Alaska has can be an advantage. It's really just hit or miss with those two. I, wow. I'm sorry, Color. I have to go with Alaska on this one in terms of just Elf.
All right. Well, there we have it. Alaska, the better elf. Maybe that'll light a little bit of a fire under Color to get him to up his game, maybe show up a
Exactly.
player a little bit, but we'll see how that goes. So I think we're going to wrap on the same question here. Where do you guys see Citrix finishing this tournament? Are they going to be in fourth place? Are they going to reach a top 3 spot, do you think? Perhaps even take out Olympus and the Baguettes? Where do you see them placing?
I see anywhere between 1 through 4 as being a potential placement for them. I think that that's very, very feasible for the strong roster that they have with them right now, and I think that they could achieve that if they put a lot of effort and consistency into it.
Yeah, I think this is definitely I think this team is pretty accurately seated. I think fourth or maybe third is where you'd expect them going into the tournament. And I do think that's where they'll end. I could see them potentially moving up to third, but I think 3 through 4 is pretty accurate, personally.
Yeah, you guys hit a lot of good points. I think their teamwork is something that's really notable and something that several other teams may lack in some way, shape, or form. And that's something that could definitely make the difference between, say, because these seeds here, the 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4 slots are all really close teams. And things like teamwork and chemistry that CX is pretty well known for can definitely make the difference between, say, a 3 and a 2 or something like that. And that's where I see them at the end of this stage.
All right. Well, speaking of our third seed here, we are finally going to actually get to Delta Force, as mentioned before, the longest running team here in the tournament. Third seeded, not fifth seeded, just so we're clear on that. And a roster that has seen some very interesting recent additions. Now, Delta Force does have a core of longtime players on their roster. Wintergreen 3 stands out as an example. Same for Link, same for Obi. Certain players like that have been around for a while. But they've also made some acquisitions recently. Zarpin stands out as an example, as does Andra. Mystic Mad joined the roster recently, and Pig3 came over from the Baguettes at a certain point not too long ago. So out of those players, and maybe some of the other ones who've joined or rejoined the roster recently, Carson, who do you think really stands out as a big acquisition?
I honestly think that Zarpin may be one of the key roles that they've been missing on the defensive end of competitive play. Um, you generally see that Delta Force may have lacked ninjas and bulk specifically. So I think having a really strong bulk player can really um, round out a defense, and it's an underrated position for sure, but definitely something that is necessary if you're trying to defend against captures from really strong offenses on other squads.
All right. Now, with that in mind, there are definitely some questions about Delta Force going on right now in terms of how they're going to perform. I think it's fair to say that a lot of their offense in the past focused on chemists with strong players like Sabwu and Pedro at various points, helping the roster out and playing that role well for them. Neither of them, I believe, are on the roster anymore. So, Mike, where do you see Delta Force's offense going from here? What's the direction you think they'll take?
They do actually have some pickups, I think, to bolster their offense a little bit after losing players like that. Again, they also did lose Nin, so I think we're gonna see Lou move up, maybe play the medic here, and then they also picked up Isofran, who again has been on a lot of teams, Olympus, a couple others who can play that elf. And interesting thing about Iso was actually playing on trackpad for a long while, but has recently moved over to keyboard and mouse and shown some pretty good improvement already after being on it for I think just over a week. Aside from that, I think Spart is always like a rock for this team's offense. He's a player they can consistently coordinate around. He can play a lot of the offensive classes. I've seen him on the Necro, the Chemist, the Soldier, the Heavy, etc. So he's always a potential capping threat going to teams. And I think that's what this team kind of needs to look for and build up is more of those capping threats. So yeah.
All right. And I guess I could ask the same question about the defense, but there are a lot more stalwart players on it, players who've been on Delta Force for a while. I think it's fair to say that standouts include Code Bastion and Gamron in certain roles. Is there anyone else on that defense, though, Renee, who you think might be a very important player for Delta Force's success?
When Link typically plays like a ninja defensive role, people get scared, and for good reason, because he can be very, very intimidating and can cause a lot of hindrances when it comes to actually getting those captures in. So he's very, very reliable on both defense and offense. And so I think that that does make him a threat. So that is something that a lot of teams are going to have to look out for. And and I should note that I think, if I'm remembering this correctly, I think Delta Force did have a PPM last night, and Link was absent, and I think that might have showed in the tie that they had with the actual selected PPM team. So I think he does make a difference, and as long as he plays in at least a majority of these matches, Delta Force could be seeing a couple of good wins here.
All right. Now, before we wrap up here on Delta Force, I do want to ask a couple more questions. First off, for Mike, I've seen a fair amount of, we'll say, trash talk in chat, maybe a little banter from a certain bulk defense player on Delta Force. Specifically, that player was calling Spart bad. Now, I think we've talked about this before, and you consider Spart to be a relatively important player for Delta Force's offense. So, do you think that assessment is right? Is Spades on the money with that?
I mean, I'm hoping it was banter, right? But in in the case that it was not banter and actually him flaming Spart, I think Spart actually brings a lot in terms of comms to this team, and it's something we don't always look at when we look at players' skill or we watch them play. We don't really know what's going on behind the scenes, but Spart is a player who has very very good game sense, and it's one of the reasons why I actually thought he was probably a top 3 or 4 chemist back when chemist had Res 1 because he was on a class that could live for long. He could coordinate a lot of the offense, he could cap, etc. I think he brings a lot to this team that people don't really understand, kind of looking in from the outside, in terms of comms again, cap threat, a whole bunch of other stuff. He's also been there for a long, long time. He is just like a leadership figure within the team and on their council and whatnot. So again, I hope Spades was joking, but in the event that he wasn't, I think he's incorrect.
All right, and follow up on that. I'll open this up to anyone, or perhaps even everyone. Who's the better player, Spart or Spades?
That's a really hot question, asking us to take sides here.
That's a little spicy. I don't know about that one.
Yeah, it seems to have led to a bit of a lull in this conversation.
Maybe they play different roles, but recently I think with Spades kind of not being around to you know, protect his reputation here. I don't want to do him too dirty with this call, but I'd have to go with the Spartan on that one. No offense to either of them. Please don't you know, bully me after this, but recently I would have to go with the Spartan 33.
All right. Well, heard it here first. So, moving on now. We do have one more question to ask about Delta Force. Is their third seed deserved? This is one that I've probably seen discussed more than just about any other seeding within the community Discord. So I'm curious what you guys think. Do you expect Delta Force to be able to maintain their third seed? Do you expect them to fall out of that position? Or do you expect them to maybe even push a little bit higher and challenge the Baguettes and Olympus for one of the top spots?
Personally, I
So,
think third. Oh, you go,
oh,
Renee.
go ahead. Go ahead, Misty.
Okay. Personally, I think 3 is a semi-accurate position for DF. I personally would have had them at 4 or 5 myself. I think a lot of the thought behind ranking DF so highly comes from a little bit of their legacy. They are a team that for a while was considered top 2 for years on CTF. Had a little bit of a lackluster performance last tournament, which is why I think they might be a little overrated in terms of seeding at the moment, because they actually they didn't make it out of the group stage, I believe, right? Um, so yeah, it's really interesting for me. I do think they could potentially push for that third or second slot, but at the moment I see them as more of a 4-5 kind of team.
Yeah, the only thing I was going to add to that was, again regarding last night's PPM, for them personally. I know that apparently they had tied with the PPM team, and it could just be because they had some of their key players missing. But my only concern is that I am a little bit nervous for them because that PPM team that they selected was perhaps not the strongest combination that they could have chosen, and they still kind of tied with them. So hopefully, once again, it was just because a couple of their teammates were missing, a couple of their key people. But I am hoping that things look up for them. And I think that they could have the potential to maintain that number 3 spot or even exceed it if they continue to do all these good things that they have been doing in the past and continue that legacy.
All right. Well, to quote the CTF Match Spotlight, DF's offensive power hasn't been the same since Snowbreak went inactive, if they're being honest. Very interesting take there. Very interesting take from all of you guys. So, with that all in mind, I think we'll see how DF does. Obviously, we may not have given them the respect they were due, so we'll see if they're able to prove us wrong. And we'll move on to the second seeded team in the tournament, Olympus. Now, that roster is one that's now been together for quite some time, and they've had strong performances. They finished a little lower than where some people might have expected them to in the tournament, but they've definitely proven themselves to be a very competitive team, taking the Baguettes to map 3 recently in what was a very contested game, and also winning against other top teams in officials, like Citrix, for example. They're a roster that has been very touted, potentially as the top challenger to unseat the Baguettes and hand them their first loss. Carson, do you think that hype is merited? Do you think Olympus is really that good of a team?
I personally do. I think that with some pickups they've made and the overall strength of the roster that we've seen improve so much over the years, last couple of years that they've been around, they definitely have the individual potential in each of their players, and they've got the teamwork. They have very strong leadership in the form of Food Court and Iceman, and then participated Paddishley as well. Some of those council members that do a great job leading the team. And I think that they, with the individual strength that they have on defense, as well as the coordination and team players that they have on offense, they definitely have a very, very real shot. In fact, I might predict that they probably could um, upseat the Baguettes once or twice this season.
All right, well, we'll get to your exact predictions later on, but Renee, I'm curious, you've been on this roster before. What do you think makes their offense work? Who are their players that other teams really need to look out for?
I would say Justin, so Sensational first and foremost, is a huge threat for anyone on the opposite defending team and is very, very intimidating. I think Ozzy and Food Court are also, also kind of contribute to that mechanism as well. So, and I think in general, it's just a lot of the communication. Everyone's really close with each other. Everyone talks with each other outside of Discord, plays different games with each other. So it does kind of facilitate like this closer bond that maybe not all teams might have initially, but they have kind of fostered that over a lot of time. So I think that that has kind of helped with their coordination in itself and has kind of helped them practice to become even closer with each other and kind of nail that offensive strike.
All right, and I think I'll ask the opposite question here to Miski. What do you think makes their defense work? What do you think that defense? Who do you think that defense needs to rely on if they're going to be able to beat some of the top teams?
This is a pretty interesting question considering we have seen a lot of different defensive looks from them recently, specifically on Pyro. Versus TB in their last match, they ran Iceman 502, but as far as I know, they've been running Carowinds on the Pyro a lot recently, and he's been playing very, very well for just not being a Pyro man. I also think their roaming is super, super strong. New players like Rhodes and the name is Sam that they've picked up somewhat recently on Assassin are very strong. Rhodes can also play the Ninja. They have Dave who's really good at bulk scout and Ninja, kind of been focusing more on that scout role, specifically on maps like Waitomo, which again is in the map pool for this week. So I mean, I think their roaming is what really makes them tick. But Carowin's moving over to Pyro could also be a big buff for them, especially considering they picked up someone to potentially replace him in the role he was filling on roaming as well.
All right, now Carson, you were on the Baguettes for their matchup against Olympus earlier on in the year. It's not been too long since that game, if we're being entirely honest. And one notable factor about that game was that TB actually held Olympus to just one cap over 3 maps. So I know you weren't playing on the defense necessarily for the majority of that match, but what do you think uh, Olympus's offense would need to do in a hypothetical future matchup to be able to actually break through against TB's defense?
Well, I think that a lot of the lack of captures against the Baguettes was due to the map pick of Skyworlds, specifically in that match being a very close 1-0, almost a 0-0 match there, and um, a very defensive-based map choices. So I'm very interested to see how they're going to play against the Baguettes on a lot of these map pools in the future. But honestly, it might just be getting those key players across the map, like such as Ozzy, who is going to do a lot of damage in the enemy flag room, and then the main cappers like Sensational and Ducks Fan um, are going to be huge for just guaranteeing those captures. Because a lot of times we've seen players like Ozzy almost guarantee the death of the enemy pyro when he enters the flag room. So that when you have such huge targets on your back, it's very important to kind of guarantee that they can live and they can stay alive during those big pushes.
All right, now before we wrap up, Renee, I would like to ask one quick question to you as well. Olympus has picked up some new members recently, recently being within the last few months. Obviously, Sir Leo was one notable pickup, but do you see any other players on that roster who haven't been there for quite the same duration as the core really being able to make a difference for this team?
Yeah, so I'll just kind of go down the line of who's been added, at least from what I can remember, we added, or they added, I shouldn't say we anymore. They added Daphne, Dave, Rhodes, Scoundrel is currently a trial member, I believe. And then they recently also have, of course, like you said, Leo, Alaska or Sayo, and then Name Sam and Trenny. So to be honest, that's a lot of pickups to kind of, to kind of let that settle with you. So it is notable. I think Dave is a really, really good scout defensive player. Very, very underrated. I think he does add a lot to Olympus's roster and strengthens it even more. I think Trenny is an excellent archer, especially since Pepe is no longer a part of Olympus and has instead joined Fotiá, as we mentioned a little bit earlier. But I think most importantly, as of the most recent picks, I think Rhodes is a very, very key player. And maybe he doesn't even know it yet, but I think he should. He's a very, very formidable assassin and also a scout player. And I think that he can add a lot to the roster. And I mean, automatically their roster and their team went up a few notches as soon as I left. So like that's also a great thing for them.
Oh, we're not going to call it the Renee leaving Olympus buff, right?
We might.
All right. Well, we've sort of discussed this by proxy a few times, but Olympus obviously have their sights set on that first seed in the tournament, that first place in the group stage. So, guys, going down the line from Carson, do you think it's within their reach? Do you think they're going to be able to take that first seed?
I think it's going to be a real challenge, but I do think that it is possible. It wouldn't surprise me at all if we do see a flip-flop between the 1 and 2 for TB and Olympus. Um, so we'll see. We really just have to see what happens here. I personally think it could be either of those teams with almost equal opportunity to take that number 1 spot.
I'm actually going to favor Olympus for the 1 seed, based on something we'll get to a little bit later. But I do think this map pool does play into their favor quite a bit, and for that reason, I'll actually say I believe they're going to end first seed at the end of the tournament.
Again, they're very, very evenly matched. And I feel so bad because, and I'm sure everyone has felt this as well, Olympus, for some reason, whether it just is like coincidence or bad luck or just a sudden pressure of that game, has always seemed to like lose a really, really important game by 1 cap, as we saw like in Ad Fundum and even the Baguettes match that they recently had. So I hope that they kind of come back with a little bit of a vengeance and say, all right, like we're going to get that 1 cap and we're going to top that this time, like no more. So I'm really hoping that they kind of, again, get that fire in their stomachs going a little bit again and really come up on top, because I think that's what everyone has been kind of interested in seeing, if that even has a potential of doing so.
All right. Well, while a bunch of ruffians are sabotaging the CMS studio in the background here, um, it is interesting to hear those predictions. I think we're going to get to the week 1 predictions a little bit later on, so I'm sure Mike will have an opportunity to explain his favor for Olympus. But with that all in mind, we're moving on to the last team we have left here, the Frenchy squad, as they were once referred to, the stale bread team. It's the Baguettes, the undefeated Baguettes as of right now. They have never lost an official match before, and they've only dropped a handful of maps. One recently to Olympus, yes, but for a long time they hadn't even done that much. So they have had some roster changes recently. I think it's fair to say. We are looking at one of them right now. This Carson fellow seems to have treacherously departed the Baguettes roster, and that may make a difference for their offense. But even with Carson gone, they've picked up some interesting players. They grabbed Zarya or Ryan from Annihilation. They picked up Rongerbox, who has been a PPM sweat, I think it's fair to say, for the last few months, added him to the roster. And they also added an interesting new medic main in Border 96 to the team. Those are some interesting players, to say the least. Out of those 3, Carson, who would you say has the best chance of filling in the gap that you left and making TB a stronger team?
Um, Out of those 3, I'd say I would have to choose either Rongerbox, who has a lot of potential to show himself in the role of chemist offense. He does a great job absorbing pressure and things like that. And Zarya Ryan also has, after playing with him a lot in the draft tournament on Bedtime Boys, and seeing him improve a lot, he has a really good attitude for playing actively and improving. Both of them actually. So either Rongerbox or Zarya for me personally would be those big pickups for the Baguettes that could do a lot in this upcoming group stage.
All right. Well, I hate to take us on a little bit of a tangent here, but since you mentioned it, we do have a Bedtime Boys representative as well as a boys' locker room representative here on the desk. So, Mike, Carson, let's settle this once and for all. Were the Bedtime Boys robbed?
No,
I think
Carson
you-
actually admitted me he was using a lag switchman. Just facts. It happened.
I don't even need to go into my opinion on this, but the cap was I'd say it counted. That's all I'm going to say.
All right. Well, very strong opinions. I don't think we've gotten any closer to a resolution on that question, unfortunately. But Miski, the Baguettes have had a very strong defense for a while, but their offense also has been a little bit of a difference maker in matches between them and other teams. So I know they did lose an important player on their offense recently. Even with that being the case, do you think the defense is a bigger strength than the offense still, or is the offense up to par with TB's defense at this point in time?
I think I'd still make the argument that the defense is just stronger, and I think personally I'd say that just because I believe this is the best defense in the team scene. It's not a knock against their offense, really. It's just the fact that they do have players like Chewy, players like Rikovs, who are considered the best, if not, or like the second best, if not the best player in their roles. And they have those players across most defensive roles. Again, Archer, BM5, Pyro, Chewy, Ninja, Rikovs, and their depth on Ninja is insane. So I do think the defense is still the stronger of the two, but again, it's not anything against their offense.
All right. Renee, this is a roster that's been very stacked, I think it's fair to say, for a long stretch of time. But there are definitely players on TB who I think it's fair to say stand out. With that in mind, who do you think the biggest key to their success is, at least on the present roster?
Um, I would probably, it's very, very hard to, divide it up into one player. So I'll start with three and then try to narrow it down. I think that, again, because the Baguettes are praised for their defensive front, I'll try to like go based on defensive players. I think that Seago, I think that Chewy, and I think that Tireless are some of the biggest strengths that they have that make their defense, or even walking into the flag room, a daunting task in itself. So I think out of those three, Chewy does seem to make the biggest difference. He again is so meticulous with his frenzies, performs it very, very well, very, very accurately. Every time someone gets in the flag room, they're on fire almost immediately. It's ridiculous, but in the best way possible for the Baguettes. So I think that Chewy perhaps stands out the most to me.
All right. Um, one other thing to bring up here, and it's been mentioned in chat, one of the players on the Baguettes, Chickdee, was restricted for a relatively long stretch of time, but has become unrestricted recently. Now, he's a player that a lot of people in the community have considered pretty strong. Mike, do you think he's going to be maybe a bit of an X factor for the team now that he's back and able to play in some of these very important matches for them?
He definitely could be if he's running the Assassin or Ninja like he was previously. Although I think he has said himself that he's focusing mainly on Elf now after his restriction. So I think it's really going to come down to what role they play him on. If it's on Elf, I'm not sure if he's going to have as much of an impact. But if it is on that Ninja or Assassin, he is one of the best players in the game on those roles.
All right. Well, to wrap up here, we'll finish with our traditional closing question at this point. Where do you see the Baguettes at the end of this tournament? Do they hold on to that number one seed that they've been given? Do they drop a match at all? Where do you think they end up?
I think that's the $1 million question for a lot of the debate about the top spot here. it's so hard to tell right now before we have even started the first week of this group stage, but I could definitely see them at number one, and would also not be surprised if Olympus or another dark horse team could be at that number one in place of the Baguettes.
Yeah, for me, I mean it's top three regardless. Probably either one or two. I personally have Olympus going at one, so that's gonna make me put TB at two here. But those teams are insanely evenly matched, and it could really go either way.
Yeah, agree completely. Nothing else to add there.
All right. Well, I believe that's taken us through all of our teams. I don't think we're going to order the teams in terms of exactly where they're going to end up, but we do have some interesting predictions to look at here. Uh, I asked everyone in advance which teams they favored in each of the week one matchups, and to my knowledge, no one except for Nin has seen everyone's responses yet. So, with that in mind, I think it's time for the big reveal. Let's go ahead and take a look at our week one predictions. All right, wonderful. Now, predictions here are definitely a bit interesting. We've got some disagreement on 3 out of our 4 matches here. So I'm going to give everyone here on the desk a little bit of a second to take stock of the predictions. Obviously, some people need a moment to look over to the stream so they can see what's going on. And with that in mind, I think we're going to take a look at the Roxerces Fotiá matchup first, because that's where we have the most disagreement among the teams in terms of predictions. We've got 2 people, myself and Miski, giving the game over to Roxerces, and we've got 2 other people, Carson and Renee, giving the matchup edge to Fotiá. So, with that in mind, I've got to ask, Carson, start us off. Why did you pick
Sure.
Fotiá?
I think that if they play I think this may be a bit of an upset pick here, but they have the potential to definitely take over Roxerces in this match. Specifically in a 10v10 size with this map pool, players like 399 or Northern Ireland could definitely make an impact and um, change the game as far as being a capping threat for them. I have a lot of trust in him in this upcoming match, and I think he's the one that's going to make the difference.
All right, Mike, let's hear a counterpoint to that. Why is Roxerces going to take the game?
So I praised Foch's offense a lot earlier, talking about players like 399 and other players that Carson did mention. But I think that Rox overall is a more well-rounded team. I think for Foch specifically, there's a little bit of a gap between their offense and their defense. And I think Rox is a team who has good enough players on defense that they might be able to slow down that offense enough to where their offense is going to be able to do work. So I have Rox really coming out like a little bit ahead of Foch on this match. This is probably the closest one for me to predict. I think it's going to be a map 3 game, but I do think Rox slightly edges it out.
All right, now, Renee, I know you did pick Fotiá here, so I do hate to put you on the spot, but Roxerces do have some very strong offense players. Obviously, we highlighted 93 before, and Fella, Glash, a bunch of other players like that are consistent offense mains. You definitely were pretty high on Fotiá's offense overall. Do you think there's anyone on that offense, though, who really matches the caliber of some of the players on Rox?
I would say that Northern and 93, especially, on a good day for both of them, are pretty evenly matched. So they, in my mind, they almost like come into equilibrium. So I try to like look at other players that might kind of overthrow that balance. And again, my prediction was based on how surprised and off guard TC was thrown by Fotiá and their individual coordination, and it just was not what we expected. So I'm thinking that Rox might also feel the same way, and that could be their downfall potentially. So that is why I gave the upper hand a little bit to Fotiá.
All right, well, definitely a very interesting matchup. I definitely, looking at it myself, gave the edge to Roxerces a little bit based on some of their new pickups, and I'm excited to see how things play out. But we are probably going to move past Annihilation versus the Crusaders here. pretty quickly. Everyone seems to be in agreement on that matchup. Anyone want to speak as to why exactly, though? Wow, you can hear a needle drop in here.
I think that um, to sound as unbiased as possible, the well-roundedness of Annihilation has seemed a little bit um, as one of their strongest points recently. Um, so I think that on the offensive side, we have gotten a bit stronger, and on the defensive side, just improving in every area we can has been able to kind of favor us, and that's why I had tended to choose Annihilation in this match.
Yeah,
All right. Go ahead.
I think that I mean it's not a secret that Annie did struggle against TC early in the year. We've actually dropped a couple matches to them, but I think a lot of that was due to our offense not really having a ton of capping threats and Henry and Kev being able to shut us down pretty easily. But now picking up Cardona and Carson as well as Nin as a little bit of an upgrade to the medic slot, I don't think that'll be as much of an issue anymore, and that's why I have us winning over them pretty handily.
Yeah, I picked, and obviously it's hard to be put on the spot being like the only one in TC representing here and still choosing Annie. But I think that with the amount of changes that TC's roster has gone through, although they are having a practice today, we are having a practice today that's going on right now. I think that it is quite an adjustment to make, and it happened pretty haphazardly. So it's hard to say, at least for the time being, how well fit the coordination will be given this new kind of team dynamic and all these different changes. So I think that that is essentially why I kind of put French A, a little bit higher than TC for this season.
All right. Well, moving on here. I do hate to put Carson on the spot, but you're the only one who picked Delta Force over Citrix. Would you like to give us the
Yes.
reasoning behind that? Why do you believe that Delta Force is going to win that matchup?
I did not realize that I would be the only one here in this spot, but I think that Delta Force has some of the strongest leaders on their team in the form of Gammon and Wintergreen, and the Spartan as well. Um, they have an incredible, spirit and teamwork ability. Their attitude for the, just in matches overall has been really strong. I've had the opportunity to play with them in a couple of their practices as a mercenary, so maybe my exposure to that has, swayed my opinion a little bit. But I think that also their recent pickups that they've made a lot of pickups in the form of maybe not people who are renowned as some of the top players in their positions, but they have players who are very active in PPMs and have a lot of dedication for the game. They're really good team players like Blockade, um, and Andra and players like that, coasting as well, who I think have a lot of potential if they work really well together, which I believe they can do. They could pull it out.
All right. Well, let's hear a counterpoint here. Renee, Miski, either of you want to jump in and tell Carson what for?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it's any secret here that Citrix has had a little bit of a struggle recently. Stream performances and whatnot aside, I do think that this offense is very, very strong. They've had maybe some coordination issues recently, but I think if they do get them fixed, I think they're going to take this match versus DF. And I don't think it's going to be particularly close, if I'm being honest. I think Citrix is a team where their defense can shut down um, DF's offense pretty well. And if their offense starts to gel and kind of bring things together, it could be over pretty quickly for DF.
All right.
Yeah. Yeah,
Renee,
I'll,
go ahead.
I'll yeah, I was just gonna agree with that. I think what also will help Citrix thrive a little bit more is that they have a lot of confidence. They have a lot of mojo, and that's really, really good for them because it kind of drives them to keep doing what they are comfortable with because they know it will work every time. So that is why I gave them a little bit of an upper hand. So I completely agree with Miski here.
All right. Well, there you have it. Obviously, I think some of the reasons brought up by Mike and Renee reflect my own decision as well. So I will definitely stand by my call there. But perhaps the more controversial call here is Miski picking Olympus over the Baguettes. And he sort of hinted at his reasoning why a bit earlier on in the broadcast, but I'd very much like to hear it. Why do you think TB is going to lose to Olympus after we saw that official match not too long ago, where TB did come out with I think it's fair to say, a convincing enough win.
Yeah, so I think this match again could have gone either way, but for me, the map pool for week 1 does it. It's going to be Rundown, Pagodas 3, and Waitomo Caves. Waitomo being the third map, I'll touch on it quickly at first, since it's not going to be super important in case the match does end after the first two. But if we do get the third map on Waitomo, that has been Olympus's map pick for a while. It fits their style of running these heavies, these chemists, etc. a lot more over some of the Elf and Soldier we've seen from other teams. Although Olympus obviously can run Soldier with Justin and Leo. But I think Waitomo was the map they actually took in that match versus TB. So if it comes down to that, and that's the deciding factor, I could see them taking it. I also think Rundown fits that style a lot for them. Similar things. And then Pagodas 3 personally is a map I think TB has shown a bit of weakness on recently. So based on the maps and these teams being almost even in my eyes, I do have Olympus taking this round 1 match.
Okay, that's definitely interesting. Renee, Carson, would you like to get a counterpoint in?
Yeah, I'll go first. I think the only reason why I kind of listed TB as toppling Olympus is because of uh, Olympus's, so to say, notorious record in recent events of losing a very important game by one cap. And again, it might just be bad luck or whatever, but we saw the same thing happen with Ad Fundum in the semifinals. On Waitomo Caves, which was a map that we all thought that Olympus was a no-brainer win for. And Kel Surprise Pi was able to cap on that last map and get a win for them. So it could just be because pressure. It could be because of luck or coincidence, or the stars just don't align. But it just seems that for some reason Olympus just really struggles with that last final cap to even or push through it.
All right.
Yeah.
And go ahead, Carson.
Yeah, sorry. I think you're right about those close moments in recent times not exactly favoring Olympus, Renee. I think if I were in the Baguettes position here, I would really be wanting to avoid going to third map. I think Rundown would be the key map for them to win, especially as a new map, maybe an X Factor kind of idea. Um, you know, that is something that their roaming needs to control. A lot of the mid area on Rundown. I think BM5 may have to change up his game plan a little bit as far as Archer goes. Versus Trenny, he may need to focus the Archer a little bit and do things like that. I think they really need to focus map 1 because that winning map 1 and then edging out a victory on map 2 or something like that is how they really need to approach this match. And I think that avoiding Waitomo Caves as much as possible after a very close 0-1 loss, I believe, on that map in the most recent official match, is something that they should. I see Miski agreeing with me here. Yeah, Waitomo definitely favors Olympus, and that's something that the Baguettes really need to avoid. I hope that they can end it in 2 maps here.
Yeah, no, I think I definitely agree with Carson on that one. If it goes to Waitomo, then Olympus do actually have a pretty good chance. That is the map that they won at the end of the day against TB in their previous official match. And this time around, Dave is on Olympus, so there's going to be no insane swap into Pyro heroics that TB will be able to pull. The insane swapper is already on Olympus's side. With that said, though, I am very curious as to why Mike has Olympus favored on Rundown in particular. My recollection with that map, and I'm going to challenge you here a little bit, Mike, is that it actually does present a lot of opportunities for mobility offense. The rooftops are extremely strong on that map. And there is a river running right down the middle where less mobile classes can definitely get trapped. So I believe you referenced Olympus's offense being able to just run it down and play the way they like to on that map. Why do you think it would favor them as opposed to maybe a more mobile offense that TB would like?
So I think in comparison to Waitomo and Pagodas, Rundown is kind of in the middle when it comes to what it favors offense-wise. I think those classes like Elf and Soldier are definitely viable there, and they're good. But I also think classes like Heavy that we see Aussie play, and Chemist, which a lot of players in the Olympus team can play, are very strong there. The Flaggerman in particular is very good for those classes. Being able to hit a Pyro with a damage spot, and getting out, going the opposite side as well. Heavy is a very strong capping class on there, in my opinion. I also think that Olympus has Food Court, who, as a medic, I think is going to be able to survive pretty well on that map compared to maybe Calig or Lar that TB would run on the other side of things. I think Food Court is a very self-sufficient medic, and I think that's very good for the style of gameplay that's seen on that map, especially with a bulkier offense.
All right. Well, I think that's going to wrap us up here. We've talked through all of our predictions. We've looked at how the matches are going to go this next week. We've talked about the strengths and weaknesses of each individual team. I'd like to give a thanks here, briefly, if Nin would be so kind, to our four-person studio offense here, studio audience here that's joined us in the studio. Shout out to Industrious, Aussie, Wintergreen 3, and Cardona for keeping us entertained this whole time. Your presence is very much appreciated. And thank you to our wonderful guests and analysts here on the desk. Thank you for giving us this wonderful insight into the CTF season. I think we're going to be wrapping up here as a result. It's been great being able to bring things to you, and we'll see how our predictions went in our next weekly recap. So tune in next week. We'll hope to all be here for the broadcast, and we'll see how everyone did. Thanks, guys.